Welcome to US History Lesson 2. Alright, here we go. First off, we left off with the Americas. And in the Americas, we went ahead and learned a great deal of things. Americans. But they're not Americans. Yet, we're still stuck with the British. The British themselves have made themselves pretty comfortable with all this, and they started making their colonies. This is a list of their colonies color-coded by their map, and this is an actual list of all the colonies that they made, with the time order in there as well too. They did go ahead and eventually make their own colonies, and they were able to land in there, take a little portion of the Indian land, and created this. This is Jamestown, one of the first American colonies that were ever settled. And, well, yeah. We'll talk about the Mayflower later, but before Jamestown, so we had this. You might notice this picture, and this is one of the most famous pictures ever. Croatoan is one of the most famous words in American history. So the British people went ahead and tried to create a colony, and they decided to call it Roanoke Island. And on Roanoke Island, they realized that, everyone disappeared. No one was there. The only clue that they left behind was this word written in Croatoan. But this is more of an urban legend now, and doesn't really happen. Roanoke definitely happened, but Croatoan is... no one really believes or is scared of this place anymore. There's a city there now. Alright, here we go. This is the Mayflower. You know this Mayflower because they were originally supposed to go ahead and do something about it. The Europeans had this Dutch-British India Company, and they went ahead and sent them to America to go ahead and, do their stuff. That's when they realized that they weren't making as much profit, and that's when King James I decided, alright, I'm taking over this, revoked their charter, and created Jamestown. Jamestown, one of the best places in America and Britain. Well, James I decided that he needed, of course, first a steady flow of income, and, they realized that wheat and other crops that they grow in Europe, the soil here sucked. It was too bad for it. Wheat couldn't grow here efficiently enough. And they needed to find a suitable plant or crop that could, make a suitable replacement for it. After several tries, they finally found the Indians smoking a little, like breathing into a pipe and breathing out smoke. They asked what the plant was, and they went ahead and showed them, hey, you know what? Yeah, this is the plant. This is a thing that we call tobacco, and they showed them some tobacco plants, and they gave them some seeds, and the British were all like, hell yeah. They tried smoking themselves, and ended up realizing that the thing was pretty addictive, and they sent it to King James I, and, he agreed to sell it, even though, surprisingly, he hated smoking. He called it a disturbing and disgusting practice, smoking, but he needed a way to fund the colonies, and nothing sells more than drugs. Speaking of drugs, they went ahead and lived a pretty happy life while learning how to, planting tobacco, harvesting it, sending it back to the Europeans, so that they can have their wonder drug. And they even had a Virginia colony, the Virginia colony, and it's one of the first few colonies that ever existed. Now, speaking of the Mayflower people who went onto the Mayflower went ahead and tried to go to Virginia. Most people in England and let's be honest with you guys, all of Europe wanted to leave Europe because it was starting to get overcrowded, overpopulation, and they needed to migrate somewhere. The population can't just explode into space, can it? No, of course not. So they all decided to migrate to America. The ones who are being religiously persecuted, such as the Catholics or the Protestants, or the Puritans who believed Protestantism wasn't pure enough, decided to all go into America. Well, the Puritans originally tried the Dutch. They originally tried the Dutch place, but they found the government a little too corrupt for them. So they signed themselves onto the Mayflower and went all the way towards America. They were originally supposed to arrive in Virginia, but of course took them way off, and they landed somewhere else. Inevitably, Massachusetts Bay Colony. And it worked. They stayed there, they made their own rules, and they even made a little early version of the Constitution. Before the Constitution existed, they had to do something, and they called it the Mayflower Compact, where they all agreed to live on towards the rules of the Mayflower Compact. And as such, the Mayflower Colony was born. And, of course, disaster struck. Inevitably, they all died. Well, most of them died, and for some reason, they decided not to bring any livestock or enough food to live in the colony for months. They brought nothing, and most of them died to disease and froze to death during winter. Luckily, not all of them disappeared, like what happened to Roanoke Island. And after the survivors survived, they were welcomed by the Native Americans, who decided that they should help these dudes who were in trouble. They helped them go ahead and learn how to plant stuff. They sent their best Indian, Squanto, to go ahead and teach them how to, well, plant squash. Squanto, squash, get it? Maize, corn, and how to make sure the soil was nutritious enough. They went ahead and showed them how to plant. This is how they did it. Fish, put some dead fish into the ground along with the seed so that it gives the ground a little bit of nutrition. The seed would eventually go ahead and grow out of the ground into whatever you planted. Corn, maize, or whatever. It's basically early versions of fertilizer. And they were able to survive, and as a result, they created the first Thanksgiving. And then they accidentally made Native Americans fight against each other because they were all like, hey, we want furs. We'll sell lots and we'll buy lots and lots of furs. We'll give you lots and lots of money for furs. We'll trade lots and lots of good valuable stuff to you for furs. And as a result, Native Americans started fighting over things. This reminds me of that video about moms over the ages in 2025. Moms in 2025. Oh, all day. Phone. Moms in 2010. All day. TV. Moms in 1990s. All day. Radio. Wait, or was that the 1950s? Moms in the 1800s. All day. Newspaper. And then the 1700s. All day. Hunting. Get it? Except the hunting part applies here pretty strongly. And they celebrated Thanksgiving, except it wasn't Thanksgiving much anymore. The Brits started trying to enslave Native Americans, but then they realized that the Native Americans weren't exactly physically strong. Well, strong physically wise. They weren't buff, unlike the African Americans. We'll talk about that in another episode. But they went ahead and expanded their colonies right into Indian territories, and they just all took it. Canada was owned by France, and after they created these 13 colonies, they were able to expand, and they created all the 13 colonies that we know and love today. These were the colonies that have permanent residents. They owned a bit more land, and they eventually fought for more land into the Indian territory. They started getting more stuff, and they started being able to, well, obtain stuff. But as you can see, as more people immigrated there, they became more culturally different than Americans. They call themselves Americans. They call themselves, I'm an American, not a British now. Like, they became more culturally diverse. Whereas other colonies of England in the other parts of the world, the Americans themselves had the most the most diverse, the most distinct version of the English. They had their own culture, separate culture. They had their own way of speaking English. At least that wasn't too different, but nowadays Americans pride themselves on having their own American English compared to the British English. Like, they call it elevator instead of lift, and they call it a truck instead of a lorry. Nothing else to really say much about after this. And I'll be frank with you, this isn't the end. The English will still be in America long after the Americans overtake their original 13 colonies. But other than that, I have no more to say. So, that's about it. Oh, one more thing I would like to mention is how the British were much more successful than, say, the Spanish or the French. Or let's just talk about the Spanish. Yeah, sure, the Spanish certainly had more land, and they've definitely been there much longer, but it was very sparsely populated. Like, the largest city in the Spanish colony pretty much only had like 300 to 400 people. Not much for a city, to be honest. Let me tell you, that's not enough for a city. Whereas the Americans, I have to stop calling them Americans. I have to start calling them the British. They're still the British. The British were like there, and they had like thousands of people coming in all the time. They went ahead and created an actual thriving community where they could live in, where they could strive in, where they could do stuff in. And as a result, they had more power, they got the more market value, and their economy started rising higher and higher. And they spent a lot to protect this. In the 7 Years' War, this war that lasted 9 years, and is aptly called the 7 Years' War. We'll talk about that next time. But until then, Shihon out peace. Bye-bye. Hope you guys enjoyed watching US history.